I will be critiquing my kayak roll so far, from the beginning of the learning process until the actual roll. I only learned the one roll, but I feel like I already have a lot of really bad habits, so I need to do this. So why don't you join me in critiquing my rolls and also critiquing my feedback as well. I started this rolling journey as I was especially interested in the Greenland rolling techniques and the history of the Greenland rolls. I reached out to someone who was coincidentally in Hong Kong at that time, and he gracefully offered to spend some time with me to get the techniques. But he wasn't going to be here long, so I knew I had to do this myself. So I got the Gearlab Rolling Float to assist me, but frankly, it was for me to have a sense of security or a security blanket while trying to get used to leaning on the edge of my kayak, and also to assist me as I was going to be doing this alone until I felt comfortable. This is me flipping for the first time with the paddle in my hand. I have flipped before during the Kayak 1-star course, but this was the first time I had the paddle in my hands. During this roll, I also had my snorkel mask. It made a whole lot of a difference. As I was comfortable, I was feeling a bit cocky, but what happened instead? I ended up contemplating my life choices. To be more acquainted with the water, I decided to do the balance brace with the float. And I tried to have my shoulders flat on the water surface and also putting my head down into the water. And I wanted to feel really comfortable in this position before I moved on. Nevertheless, I decided to move on and try a roll with the float. And I have to say, this is my first attempt, so I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But to my surprise, I succeeded. And of course I celebrated. But let's rewind a little bit because I was really lucky here. As you can see, I got really lucky with this setup. The float actually made it to the right side, which meant I could set up for the roll. However, for the next 2 tries, I wasn't as lucky. And I was even thinking what was going on. And you can see here, I was completely disoriented because I wasn't sure what was going on. Someone did give me a comment that I should flip the other way. So the next time I went out, I did exactly that. And I was very, very happy that I was setting up correctly. Even though I made this roll, the paddle was really far away from my chest. And I'm using brute force to push myself up. And next time I have to put the paddle closer to my chest. And here are a couple of rolls after the first one, which was okay. After a few rolls with the float, I decided to take the float off and try it without the float. And on my first attempt, I made it, and I was so ecstatic. I was so happy. I was very surprised that I actually succeeded in a roll without the float. You can see my head was coming out of the water first, which should be coming out last. And my paddle was very far in front of me, which I should have closer to me. And lastly, the angle of the blade. I'm surprised I didn't fall into the water. But again, I think I was just using brute force. And here are a few other successful rolls that I did without the float. Now let's look at my roll from a different angle. From the start of this roll, you can see that the angle of my blade was already wrong. The placement of my paddle is in the wrong place, and you can see I'm using a lot of force to push myself up. And again, my head was coming out of the water first. So what this means is that my body is arched the wrong way actually. And what that does is that it stops me from having my leg in the right position to drive the kayak up. And ultimately me going back into the water. So the second time round, I took my time to set myself up. I also had to adjust myself because I was falling out a little bit. But again, this roll wasn't perfect, but I still managed to get back up only because I was using brute force. Okay, so the next part isn't really a roll, it's just one part of the reverse sweep roll, which is the pry. I actually feel my head is in the right position because it's the last part of my body coming up to the surface. But as you can see, I didn't follow through with that and my head came up really fast. And my body came up from the side of the kayak, but instead it should be coming up from the front with my head facing down. Let's have a look at this from a different angle. I feel like here already I'm reaching out really far, but instead I should be using my pivot hand underneath my body, aligned with the spine. My other hand, which is the sweep hand, should be closer to my head. And you can see while coming up, I put my head out first, which should be the last, always. And another thing is my head should be sliding sideways, bent forward where my nose is almost touching the deck of the kayak. But most importantly, I was holding the paddle incorrectly, so that's why it felt a little awkward. Now, if you haven't seen any of my kayak rolling journey, I have a few videos and you can have a look at them here.